Have you ever thought about how your thoughts affect your body and your behaviour? If you're anything like me and you're locked in a pessimistic mindset on a daily basis, keep listening to this video. I want to offer you some insight into how our mind and body react to each other, how our thoughts affect our emotional processing, and how that emotional processing affects our behaviour. This video should hopefully offer some insights into the science around our thoughts. So here's some research. Studies including attentional bias in emotional disorders show that people, especially those with anxiety disorders, are more attuned to negative or threatening cues in their environment, suggesting a heightened sensitivity to such information. Negative thinking, often manifesting as worry about potential bad outcomes, serves as a mental strategy preparing for possible challenges. This process can trigger the brain's reward system, especially when we successfully avoid or lessen these perceived threats. So from negative thought to emotion and behaviour. So studies show that negative thinking and anticipating threats can prompt a physiological reaction, which are integral to the body's survival process. When a situation or a negative thought about that situation is perceived as threatening, it activates the limbic system, and the limbic system is our brain's emotional processing centre. The limbic system quickly processes and responds to potential threats, integrating sensory information, emotional responses, physiological changes, and contextual memory. Our brains are a black box inside our skull. It doesn't understand the difference between a potential threat that is right in front of us in our physical world and the potential threat that we think about. So what is the limbic system, our emotional processing centre, doing when we think about a threatening situation? So more science. The thalamus is that's where the process begins, which receives the initial sensory information, i.e. the thought, and it acts as like a relay station, processing and forwarding sensory data from the environment, or what the brain perceives as sensory information from the environment, i.e. the thought, and it sends it off to the amygdala. And the amygdala is like our threat processing centre of the brain, so it's critical for processing emotions, particularly fear. And the amygdala assesses the emotional significance of that stimulus and triggers an emotional response accordingly, and such as like fear and anxiety. At the same time as the amygdala is being triggered, the hypothalamus activates the body's fight and flight stress response. And this includes all the physiological changes that we feel when we're thinking about something threatening, or if we have something threatening in real life in front of us. It will be heightened heart rate, heightened alertness. It also releases the stress hormones, including cortisol. Now, cortisol is probably a hormone that you're aware of, but basically it prepares the body for fight or flight. And it does quite a lot of things to our body in that moment. It will manage stress by boosting tissue repair substances and regulating our metabolism, which is great for instances where we want to fight or run, and that it will increase blood sugar for brain energy. But more critically, it also temporarily reduces functions. So it will reduce functions like digestion and immunity, because it's not needed in times of fight or flight, and it can also disrupt sleep. So it's really, really critical that we understand that when we are chronically stressed for long periods of time, our body is firing off these signals to trigger these stress responses like cortisol that are just continually pumping this around our bodies, and it can be really devastating for the human body. So what happens to our behaviour then? Once we've gone through, so we've had the thought, that has triggered the emotional processing centre in our brains. We have felt all the physiological changes of a threat, cortisol is being pumped through your system, ready for fight or flight. So what happens to your behaviour? So this is where the next part of the emotional processing comes from, in the hippocampus. So the hippocampus becomes involved to contextualise the threat, and this contextualisation is based on past experience and memories. This helps in determining the appropriate behavioural response, whether to confront the fear or to run, in the matter of where it's not something that's coming to kill you, or like a saber-toothed tiger back in the hunter-gatherer times. It could be a horrible boss, someone at work, or someone in your family. And when that is threatening, and when we're thinking about that, remember, it's creating the same physiological response as it would if they were standing right in front of us. It's in a black box, our brain. It doesn't understand the difference. So if we're imagining a situation where we're in front of this person, it thinks we're in front of this person. This can lead to intense physiological responses from the hypothalamus, such as rapid heartbeat and increased cortisol, like we said, causing panic. And then the hippocampus may then label that similar future event as threatening, leading to avoidance behaviour in similar situations. So in many modern day situations, we actually choose to avoid and retreat rather than to fight. And this is why often fear responses are learned. So there are some fear responses that are innate: predators, pain, heights, rapidly approaching objects, ancestral threats such as like snakes and spiders. I think that most of our modern day fears are learned, and this is why modern day fears are so subjective to the person, because it's all dependent on your past experiences and how the experience was processed within the limbic system. If we don't understand the mechanisms behind these things and how it is affecting our behaviour, how are we ever going to understand what we're doing on a daily basis and what we're missing out on? So, negative thinking is an evolutionary tool keeping us alert to threats. But this can be a double-edged sword if we are prone to consistent negative thinking and rumination. Negative thinking, remember, triggers the brain's emotional processing centres, and this can then lead to emotional responses of fear and anxiety. And when we have those emotional responses, it then triggers a particular behaviour, and these behavioural responses can be fight or escape. The point of this video today was to help you to understand the link between thought and emotions and behaviour, and how a simple thought can trigger a physiological response and a behavioural response in us humans. Becoming more aware about how our negative thinking affects our body and affects our behaviour can really help us to understand some of the behaviours that we are doing and some of the feelings we are feeling automatically every day. So why do we need to know all this? What's the point? Evolution has created our bodies to deal with a world so very different to what we live in. It's vital that we understand the mechanisms of our bodies, because without that understanding, we can't find strategies and ways to cope in this modern world. Be sure to come back to segment 2, where I talk about how practice makes programs. So we might be aware that our thoughts affect our emotional processing and our behaviour, but how do we know when we're having these thoughts? Are we even aware? Are they too automatic that we really don't even recognise them? Automatic thinking patterns, behavioural responses and emotional responses are developed through repetition, and I'll be talking to you about how the brain forms programs in the subconscious to ensure that we can do things automatically without thinking in our conscious minds. This is called brain plasticity, and I hope to discuss this with you next time.